A Grain of Wheat, written by Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o and first published in 1967, is one of the most significant novels in African literature. Set in Kenya in the period leading up to the country's independence from British colonial rule, the Uhuru period, the novel weaves together the stories of various villagers as they reflect on the Mau Mau rebellion, betrayal, resistance, and the cost of freedom. It is a complex, multi-voiced narrative that interrogates heroism, sacrifice, and the ambiguity of human morality. Drawing from Christian allegory, particularly the biblical metaphor that a grain of wheat must die to give life, the novel explores the idea that liberation requires suffering and self-sacrifice. It is a profound exploration of colonialism's psychological scars, and the individual and collective price of Kenya's independence. The novel is set in Tabai, a rural Kenyan village, in the days leading up to Uhuru Day, Independence Day, in December 1963. The narrative unfolds through the memories and experiences of several characters who reflect on the struggles during the emergency period, a time of British suppression of the Mau Mau uprising, 1952–60. Central to the story is Ngũgĩ, a reclusive and solitary man who is mistakenly believed to be a hero of the independence struggle. The villagers want to honor him during the Uhuru celebrations for his supposed resistance and principled stand during the colonial crackdown. Other key characters include Thiong'o, a carpenter and former detainee who returns home to find his wife changed. Mumbi, Thiong'o's wife, who bore a child by another man during Thiong'o's imprisonment. General R, a former freedom fighter who seeks to expose the betrayer of Kahika, a young revolutionary who was captured and executed after being betrayed. Karanja, a collaborator who worked with colonial authorities during the emergency and is now despised by the community. As the story progresses, it is revealed that Ngũgĩ, the man thought to be a hero, was in fact the one who betrayed Kahika to the British. Racked with guilt, he eventually confesses publicly, choosing to embrace his punishment and symbolically become the sacrificial grain of wheat. The novel ends with the characters facing the truth about themselves and their pasts. Ngũgĩ is arrested, but his confession leads others to confront their own betrayals and choices. The celebration of Uhuru is marked not by triumphant joy, but by sobriety and reflection, as the villagers acknowledge that independence came at a steep cost, and that the struggle for justice continues beyond colonialism. Title significance. The title A Grain of Wheat is drawn from John chapter 12 verse 24 in the Bible. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a grain of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. This metaphor is central to the novel's theme of sacrifice. True freedom, Ngũgĩ suggests, is achieved through the death of the individual ego, or in some cases, actual physical death, as in the martyrdom of Kahika or the symbolic surrender of Ngũgĩ. The title reflects the Christian and revolutionary motifs that run through the book, where redemption comes through suffering and where betrayal, guilt, and redemption must be faced collectively. Character analysis. Ngũgĩ is the novel's most complex character. He is introverted, emotionally numb, and alienated. Though the villagers believe him to be a hero, he is haunted by the guilt of having betrayed Kahika, a revolutionary who trusted him. Ngũgĩ's arc is a psychological journey from denial and isolation to confession and acceptance of guilt. His ultimate act, publicly revealing the truth, turns him into a tragic hero. He becomes a symbolic grain of wheat, sacrificing himself to expose the hypocrisy of false heroes and the hidden costs of liberation. Kahika is a charismatic, idealistic leader of the Mau Mau resistance. He assassinated a British district officer and became a legendary figure before being betrayed and hanged. Though largely absent from the narrative physically, he remains present through others' memories. He represents the spirit of resistance, youthful idealism, and martyrdom. Thiong'o A carpenter and former detainee, Gaikanyo returns home to discover that his wife, Mumbi, has had a child with Karanja. He struggles with bitterness, wounded masculinity, and failure, having lost both time and intimacy. Gaikanyo's efforts to reclaim his identity and love reflect the emotional damage of detention and war. His eventual attempt at reconciliation shows the possibility of healing and growth. Mumbi is one of the novel's few prominent female characters. She is dignified, honest, and emotionally resilient. Her confession to Gaikanyo about her relationship with Karanja demonstrates her moral strength. She stands as a symbol of Kenyan womanhood, enduring, nurturing, but often marginalized in historical narratives. Karanja is seen as a traitor and collaborator, having worked for the British as a homeguard. However, his actions are not presented as purely villainous. He is portrayed as a man motivated by fear, survival, and love for Mumbi. He represents the moral ambiguity of collaboration, a man crushed by colonial pressure and personal longing. Themes: 1. Betrayal and guilt. Betrayal, personal, political, and communal, is the central theme of the novel. Mugo betrays Kahika. Mumbi is perceived to have betrayed Gaikanyo, and Karanja collaborates with the colonial administration. These betrayals are not merely acts of weakness but are symptoms of deeper societal trauma and personal desperation. The novel asks whether confession and truth-telling can lead to healing. 2. Sacrifice and martyrdom. Ngũgĩ elevates certain characters, like Kahika and Mugo, into martyr-like figures whose actions and deaths provoke reflection and transformation. Sacrifice is shown as essential to revolution, but also as a complex and painful process that exposes human contradictions. 3. Colonialism and its aftermath. Although set on the eve of independence, the novel is focused on the wounds inflicted by colonialism, prisons, forced labor, cultural erasure, and ideological divisions. Independence is not depicted as a glorious event but a moment for reckoning and re-evaluation. Ngũgĩ critiques not just the colonizers but the post-colonial elites who may replicate colonial power structures. 4. Community and individualism. The tension between individual desires and communal needs is a constant theme. Mugo's isolation, Gaikanyo's emotional withdrawal, and Karanja's self-serving choices contrast with the communal expectations of sacrifice and solidarity. True liberation, the novel suggests, requires reconnection with the community. 5. History and memory. Ngũgĩ uses multiple perspectives and nonlinear storytelling to emphasize that history is constructed through memory, and memory is always contested. The past is not a fixed narrative but a living force that shapes the present. The collective act of remembering is portrayed as essential for building a just society. Narrative style and structure. A Grain of Wheat is written in a nonlinear, multi-perspective structure, combining flashbacks, interior monologues, and third-person narration. The narrative weaves through the consciousness of multiple characters, giving a layered and fragmented view of history. This polyphonic style allows Ngũgĩ to explore the contradictions and internal conflicts of his characters, showing how individuals perceive events differently. The lack of a single dominant voice mirrors the complexity of national memory and resists simplistic heroic narratives. Ngũgĩ's prose is lyrical and reflective, laced with biblical allusions, African oral traditions, and political commentary. His use of allegory and metaphor elevates the novel to a philosophical meditation on freedom and responsibility. Symbolism. Grain of Wheat. Central metaphor for death and rebirth, sacrifice for communal good. Uhuru Day. Symbolizes not just political liberation but also the need for truth and moral reckoning. Mugo's hut. Symbol of isolation and guilt. A prison of the self, broken only by confession. Land. Represents both freedom and identity, being central to the struggle and a marker of dignity. Critical reception and legacy. A Grain of Wheat is considered one of Ngũgĩ's greatest works and a cornerstone of post-colonial African literature. It was written in English before the authors later turned to writing in Gikuyu, and it reflects a transitional phase in his thinking, from liberal nationalism to a more radical, Marxist critique of power and identity. Critics have praised the novel's psychological depth, historical realism, and moral complexity. It is particularly noted for its subversion of the hero narrative, exposing the ambiguities and human costs of revolution. However, some have critiqued the novel for its limited portrayal of women, whose roles are often symbolic or secondary. Yet even within these constraints, Mumbi stands out as a morally grounded and emotionally rich character. Conclusion: Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o's A Grain of Wheat is a masterful novel that uses the lens of a single village to explore Kenya's journey toward independence, highlighting the moral, emotional, and political complexities of decolonization. It challenges readers to question simplistic narratives of heroism and to recognize that true liberation is messy, painful, and deeply human. Through its multifaceted characters, intricate structure, and enduring themes, the novel invites reflection on the price of freedom, the burden of memory, and the possibility of collective healing. As Kenya celebrates uhuru, A Grain of Wheat reminds us that freedom is not an endpoint but a beginning, one that demands truth, sacrifice, and continuous struggle for justice.